Hello everyone. It has been over a year since I uploaded my video about executive dysfunction, which, as well as being a symptom of conditions including but not limited to autism, dementia, traumatic injury to the frontal lobes of the brain, is also a lesser known symptom of ADHD. Something I touched on in that video was that the symptoms of things like ADHD can sometimes be quite confusing because they're not really what we understand to be symptoms, right? They're just sort of the results of them. Like, a symptom of a cold is a runny nose, but wanting to stay in bed all day feeling sorry for yourself and a desire to drink soup are not symptoms. They're just the results of them. They're just the outward behaviours that you'd often find in someone with a cold because they're having to deal with the symptoms. And I feel like it's kind of similar with a lot of symptoms of ADHD. Like, one of the more common symptoms of ADHD is chronic lateness, often referred to as time blindness. And that is one that people seem to struggle to get on board with, which I respect. It sounds like the laziest cop-out in the world. Hi. Sorry I'm late. What happened? Oh, just a series of minor inconveniences that were completely avoidable if I had used a bit of foresight and allowed extra journey time. It sounds like you've just taken a negative behaviour and blamed it on a condition with no logic to back it up. But that mentality just comes from a lack of understanding. Like, if someone had never heard of a cold before and they were just like, oh my god, Susie is so weird. She keeps just like taking a tissue, putting it to her nose and blowing air into it. Like, sure. Why is Susie doing that? But then if you understand that Susie is suffering from a cold and that her sinuses are probably quite swollen and that her body is trying to expel snot from her nose to try and get rid of some of the virus, then you're like, oh, poor Susie. Sucks that she's full of snot today. And that kind of insight is what I would like to provide a little bit of today. Why are people with ADHD always late? Well, firstly, people with ADHD are often chronic bad sleepers. We're disorganised and lacking routine despite really needing it to function, which is like so inconvenient. The solution is unattainable because of the problem. Whose idea was that? Many of us have no nightly routine, no average bedtime, no regular amount of sleep. Plus, even if we did try to go to bed early, you can imagine that having a restless mind kind of makes that more difficult. And we also, for reasons that the medical community doesn't fully understand yet, have much higher instances of restless leg syndrome and sleep disordered breathing, which is stuff like sleep apnea, snoring, anything related to that. Anything that takes you off automatic breathing mode. So quite often we're getting really interrupted sleep and we're getting it at weird times, which doesn't bode well for trying to get up bright and early to do all of your important plans like work and school and job interviews and literally anything. Without a regular sleep cycle, you're likely to be waking up at different times every day, which means the chances of you waking up in the correct stage of sleep are pretty low. Everyone has those days where you wake up feeling like you've been hit by a truck. Like sometimes it's because you went from being deep in a dream to wide awake too quickly. It feels like jet lag. You're groggy, you're confused, there's a lot going on. And obviously in that state, you're going to take longer to get going in the morning. For many reasons. Number one, the grogginess and the brain fog. Number two, no routine. Remember? No nightly routine, but also no morning routine. Most people get through that zombie stage of the morning because they don't have to think about a plan. They just automatically follow the usual steps on autopilot. Until 20 minutes later, they've brushed their teeth, they've gotten dressed, they've had a wee, and they're sat downstairs eating breakfast and drinking a coffee as their brain finally switches on. But how the hell are you supposed to get up if you don't have a routine? And if your brain struggles to put the steps of getting up in the right order? Where do you start? I never start my day the same. Sometimes I pee, sometimes I get dressed and then go have breakfast. Sometimes I scroll through Twitter until my eyes wake up. So there's nothing to start me off. It's like every day feels like my first ever day on Earth. And no one's downloaded the detailed history of my life into my head yet. In the most basic sense, this attention deficit means that my brain isn't alert enough to register the important information around me. Was my alarm labelled dentist at 10 a.m? Is there a note on the floor next to my slippers that says dentist at 10 a.m? Is don't forget dentist appointment written on my face or on the bathroom mirror or circled 8 times in thick red marker on my calendar? Maybe, but my brain doesn't work like a neurotypical brain. It doesn't follow the normal steps of step 1, who am I? Step 2, what day is it? Step 3, what are my responsibilities today? It's like my brain doesn't acknowledge the fact that it's awake. Until I see a visual reminder, I am not going to remember it. And usually the information is everywhere. I've really tried. I just don't have any control on how I get from the stage of opening my eyes to processing that information. And this can also be an issue if you take medication for your ADHD, but you've forgotten to take it, or it hasn't kicked in yet. It's easy for neurotypical people to be like, I don't understand why you don't just check your phone. And I get it. It does sound like I'm just being a dum-dum. But you really have to stop and assess what is it that makes you check your phone? Is it memory? Is it instinct? Is it automatic? Now imagine that instinct wasn't there. You can't take credit for something your brain does automatically, and you can't blame me if mine doesn't do it. But, of course, it isn't always sleep that causes us to be late. That one is a big factor because a lot of important commitments often require an early start. But we're always late. So why? Well, executive dysfunction, the topic of that last video, is super important to be able to understand this symptom. But in that last video, I kind of just talked about what it felt like to be stuck in a state of obvious executive dysfunction, because what I was trying to get across was the feeling. But to properly understand the connection of people with ADHD and chronic lateness, you kind of need to have a more neurological understanding of it, I guess. Thank you, doctor. In short, the executive functions are the functions we develop that set us aside from other animals. The way they're described and listed can vary based on where you're looking, but fundamentally, they all describe the same set of skills. Things like attention control and inhibition, the ability to stop and think about what you're going to do instead of responding impulsively to a stimulus, especially when working towards a specific goal. And not just super long-term goals like get a degree or finish this project, but also things like go to the toilet, leave the house. It's your working memory, including short-term info like don't forget your keys that you just saw on the kitchen table, but also the ability to hold images in your mind of the past and the future long enough to conceptualize the consequences of your decisions and actions, and then changing your behavior to plan for the best results. Which is everything from having an impulsive thought but thinking, no, don't call your boss an idiot, and no, don't balance your cup of tea on the trackpad of your laptop, because you visualize the time you spilt tea on your laptop and you calculate that it could happen again. Also included is cognitive flexibility, the ability to encounter a problem and then mentally conceptualize loads of different ways to get around the problem. For most people, those processes are so natural and obvious that it's not even a consideration. It's not supposed to be something you have to consciously think about. But you can imagine, right, that if you can't maintain attention when you need to, and you can't exercise inhibition, getting sidetracked is inevitable. If I have to leave soon, I could get sucked into literally anything and not feel those 10 minutes pass. It could be the telly, it could be reading an article on my phone, it could be messaging someone, it could be doing the dishes. I've been really on track to leave on time before, but then I've spotted a plate on my bedroom floor. Before I know it, 20 minutes have passed and I don't really know how it happened. But it's because I took the plate to the sink, saw the other dishes, did all the other dishes, and now I'm busy sweeping the floor with no idea that my bus is leaving the stop around the corner. But a big thing people don't seem to understand is that it's not about external distractions. The problem is internal. You could place me in an empty room with nothing on the walls, no distractions, just one solitary clock. And you can tell me that if I exit that room after half an hour, I could win £1 million. I cannot guarantee you that I'll be able to do that. 40 minutes later, you could come back into the room and find me daydreaming, staring at a corner of the room. And what I'm thinking about is that episode of My Parents Are Aliens where Sophie can't morph back into her old body and she says, "Yes, my hair's dyed. We're all very sad about it." That's a good show. Or maybe I'm trying to use the width of my arms to measure the length of the room wall to wall. Or maybe I'm turning away from the clock periodically and counting in my head to check if my perception of 10 seconds is accurate or not. Who knows where I'll be? Not me. And sometimes it's funny. Sometimes it's funny that when I nip upstairs to take a cup of tea to Ro, who also has ADHD, that 10 minutes later, we're watching a half-hour video about how the shape of guitars changes the resonance of the sound. But it's less funny when this infuriating inability to stay on task has cost me £1 million. And it's not funny when you miss your flight home for Christmas. And it's not funny when you don't get your dissertation handed in on time and risk failing your degree. It's not funny when you're late to a funeral. And it's hard to explain that to someone without ADHD, because most people have a background level of attention on the wider world as part of the executive system. Why didn't you just check the clock? Because I couldn't. Everyone's familiar with the feeling of being completely engrossed in something and then thinking, blimey, is that the time? Well, in those instances, why weren't you looking at the clock, Susan? How did that time sneak up on you? It can feel like that's what we're living every 15 minutes or so. I was once very, very on time at a bus stop, but I was daydreaming at the raindrops landing in a nearby puddle, and I didn't notice the bus slowly approach my location as the driver looked at me, saw that I wasn't flagging him down, and then very fairly concluded that I wasn't getting on that bus. And that can be quite funny. And it can be quite funny to laugh at the fact that I was waiting for my CV to print out because the email for this job interview told me to take a physical copy with me. But now I'm sat on the sofa Googling how radio waves work. Like, it is quite funny. But it's also really humiliating. What a basic thing I am unable to do. To stay on task. Often for things I really care about. How can anyone possibly understand how profoundly it affects my life when it sounds so silly? But it does. And with that lack of awareness of time comes a lack of awareness of how long things will take. If I've driven to a destination, say 3 times, I still won't know how long the journey takes. Because I won't feel the time pass, and I won't remember to check time at the start and end of my journey. So it's fairly common for me to have to drive somewhere for a job and have an idea in my head of when I should leave that I think is based on experience, but actually is completely wrong. So quite often I get somewhere late, even when I left at what I thought was the correct time. Because when you eternally live in this warped sense of time, you can't suddenly apply a correct prediction of time just on a whim. The entire network is down. But next up, right, let's assume that I have the correct time in mind. I've added on 20 minutes to allow for anything that goes wrong, and by some miracle, I've got the right amount of journey time in my head. The lack of routine caused by having a deficit of the executive system means that if I have managed to stay on track, even if I've got my attention on the goal, I'm still going to hit loads of delays caused by a specific time in the past when I should have done something to prepare for this event. Maybe I'm going to work and I was supposed to wash my work clothes and I forgot. Maybe I have a deadline for an edit that I've been working on all week. And the deadline is today. And I just need to wait for this to export before I can leave, otherwise I'll get in more trouble than the lateness will cause me. Maybe I put my keys somewhere stupid. Maybe I couldn't print out my CV because there's no paper for the printer. Maybe I forgot to pay my council tax and I've just remembered and I'm trying to rush to get it done now. Maybe I suddenly remember that this is the last day I can send that package back to be able to get a refund. Any event we're trying to be ready for is hindered by our previous lack of planning. And that's why helpful suggestions from very well-intentioned people can be kind of hurtful.
Why don't you try setting a reminder on your phone? Why don't you try setting 2 alarms in the morning? Why don't you get stuff ready the night before? Why don't you try leaving the house 20 minutes earlier?
Yes, I want to, Stephanie. That's what I'm trying to do for 12 years. That last one was suggested to me by a coworker when I worked in a call centre. So I got 3 late strikes very quickly in that job. And to them, it didn't seem to matter if you were 3 minutes late or 20 minutes late. So they tell me that I've got to have a meeting with HR about the lateness and that I might lose my job. And don't get me wrong, I didn't get that job because I had a passion for selling satellite TV. I got it because I needed to pay my rent. So a bunch of the people on my team were very sympathetically helping me prepare for this HR meeting. And then one of them just suggests that I leave 20 minutes earlier. Why don't you try leaving the house before you currently leave the house? And I'm like, do you think that is the issue? Do you think the issue that has plagued me for half of my life was because not once did I make the connection that if I kept arriving somewhere not on time, that I should leave my house earlier? The issue with these suggestions is that they rely on there being at least one point in the past where I am not someone with ADHD, as if the problem only arises when it's visible to them. Like they see me being late every day, but they just assume that every other second of my day is a beautifully organised tapestry of events. No. If someone's late all the time and they seem to really care about it, clearly they have an issue with organisation. They might not necessarily have ADHD, but I doubt anyone chooses to be late. We know it's bad. We know what people think of us. And that's the issue. Timekeeping is seen by most of society as having a direct correlation to how much someone cares about something. If someone's late to a job interview, clearly they just didn't care enough to get there on time. And even if you were to let that one slide, do you really want someone working for you who can't be on time to important things? As soon as I started walking to school on my own at about age 9, I was late. And this was the same all through high school, into college, and now at work. I remember when I was at college, every single week I thought, this is going to be the week I turn my life around. Sometimes I would try putting my alarm clock outside of my room, but I would still sleepwalk, get up, turn it off, and get back into bed. I would wake up late, be panicking and rushing, thinking I could still make it there on time, but something would always get in the way. Like, I'd forget something important, have to go back and get it, and then miss the bus. And I remember every single day, as soon as it was obvious that I was definitely going to be late, when I was running as fast as I could to catch my second bus, but only make it to the end of the road in time to see the bus pulling away, this really intense feeling of guilt and shame would wash over me. I couldn't think of anything except how much of a failure I was. I'd get the next bus and be daydreaming out the window with a pit in my stomach. Failing to get there on time every day tore apart my self-esteem. I was already struggling to function and organise myself with undiagnosed ADHD. But now, not only was I trying 1,000 times harder than my tutors thought I was being seen as someone who was trying 1,000 times less than everyone else. I liked my tutors at college. I hated when I walked into the room late and they thought I didn't care about the lesson. I hated feeling like I'd let people down, and I still do. Whenever I'm going somewhere, as soon as it's obvious that I might be late, I cannot get out of this mentality that I'm just the worst. They don't want to see me anyway. I'm not worth the opportunity. I hate when everything goes wrong and I'm late for a restaurant shift because I'm not an asshole. I know how much it can screw everyone over when someone's late. And in those moments, I hate it and I hate myself. People think lateness is laziness, immaturity, lack of professionalism and work ethic. They think it shows a general lack of care. But there have been so many things that I love that were really important to me that I've lost because I was late. Do you think I wanted to miss flights? To have to spend triple the original amount of money booking another one? I don't make much money. That second flight just cost me 25% of my monthly income. Why would I choose that? And with emotional regulation also being massively affected by ADHD, those feelings of guilt and shame can be felt really intensely. So I can assure you, if you're still one of those people who thinks that all we need is a kick up the ass, don't worry. The self-hatred I have is more than enough punishment, I promise. So what to do, huh? What to do? As you now understand, being on time takes a lot more mental processing than just deciding to leave the house at a certain time. Obviously, I don't think it's productive to outright say, I have ADHD and therefore this is impossible. But I do also think it's important to face the issue for what it actually is. A symptom caused by an impairment in the executive functioning system caused by a neurodevelopmental disorder. I will keep trying. I will find an organisation technique that sticks. I mean, by this point, I've been through so many, so by process of elimination, like, it's gotta be the next one, right? To anyone else with ADHD who is stuck in that cycle of trying and failing again and again, you will find something that sticks too. Don't be so hard on yourself. Don't listen to the people telling you you're just lazy. Every year, there is more and more research backing up what we already know. ADHD destroys the frontal lobe developments of the executive functions. That is why you are struggling. So be kind to yourself. Pick yourself up off the floor and try again tomorrow. But most importantly, if you are in a position to do so, talk to the people around you about this problem. Explain to them how difficult it is for you. Make an action plan. Work together. Some amazing schools now do home calls to certain students to help wake them up. That would have made a world of difference to me. Not only because it would have done the job of waking me up, but also because it would have sent a really reassuring message to my heart that although this is an issue, and although it's bad, that someone cares enough and believes me enough about how difficult I find it, that they're actually willing to try and help. To anyone who might end up living with, marrying, managing, teaching or parenting someone with ADHD, please just allow a little bit more leeway. Maybe try rotoring them on 15 minutes early to account for it. Be a little bit more understanding when you see them arrive sweaty and panicked with their shirt buttoned up wrong. For friends, please believe us that it's not that we don't care. Maybe try messaging to check in about prearranged plans before you leave the house, to give us time to account for a potential lateness in advance before you're left sitting in a coffee shop on your own. So you're saved from the potential impact it could have on your day, and we're saved from feeling guilty about it. And something that I always really appreciate, which might be unexpected, and also might not be true for everyone, so do double check. But if all else fails, and I am late, give me the chance to explain. Don't feel like you have to glaze over the point and just say it's fine, when we both know it's not. Give me the chance to take responsibility, properly apologise, and validate the inconvenience that I've caused you. This isn't my fault, but that doesn't mean I shouldn't acknowledge the issues I've caused. I can't change the past, but I can change the present. I find the smoothest relationships are with the friends who, if I'm late and we're meeting for food, will let me buy their food if I offer. With bosses who are understanding that it's an issue for me and won't yell at me, but might pick a boring or gross job for me to do later. Something that shows a recognition of the fact that it was bad, I did mess up, but gives me the chance to make it right. As long as it's all within that good, healthy relationship and this isn't a boss like singling you out. Like this was in a situation where it was all very lighthearted and they were very supportive of me. And on both sides, for us and those around us, it's okay if you're getting frustrated. Just make sure that you don't fail to recognise the improvements that you have managed to make. You're doing great. And remember, progress is progress.